Let's loom knit your sweater. Today is part 4 of 6, the sleeves.
Welcome to GoodKnit Kisses. We're all about helping you stitch your love and love your stitches.
All right, well, we're back and we are ready to work on your sleeves. We will work on one sleeve today, and then of course you'll repeat that. We're going to do a lot of increases, and you already know how to do your cuff and the main pattern, but today we're actually going to tweak the main pattern just a little bit, so I am going to show you that as well. So let's skip on over to the sleeve page. Be sure and go down to the link down below to get your updated pattern. You're going to go to this page, part 4, the sleeves. Now we're going to be casting on, and you've got 33 stitches to cast on for the smaller 3 sizes and 35, 37, 39 for the upper 3 sizes. However, your loom needs to be at least this many pegs for all the other sizes. So you need 49 pegs on your loom. It's actually going to be 50 because of course we've got an even number in the flexi loom. And then 55 pegs for the medium, 57 for the large, 61 for the 2X or for the 1XL and the 2 and 3XL, and then 63 for the largest size of the 4-5XL. So you'll cast on as normal. So let's go over to our pegs and look at this for a second. So I've got a couple of stitch markers on here to kind of illustrate, but from this red stitch marker all the way over to this one, this represents an even number, and then we're actually going to go one more over. So from this one all the way to this red peg for my small size, I have 33, and then I've added enough pegs to cast on the extra later on. So if you'll put all of these on here, it'll make your increases easier just to have them already on the loom, because what's going to happen is we're going to connect this, and then as we go, you'll be increasing and getting wider and wider and wider until you're left with just one peg left, and it makes it so much easier. Once you get the stitches all on here, you can get rid of these stitch markers. However, I would suggest that you keep one on here, and this will mark your specialty stitch. It'll mark the first part where you start setting up in the row where you have the slip with the yarn in front of the peg. So say this is your end peg and this is that slip with the yarn in front of the peg. I suggest going ahead and doing that. So the part in the pattern where it says continue in pattern, if you remember from the beginning, let's go back over this area. I've actually added this part in just to make it easier. Let's look at the notes on, this is the 3rd page. It says continue in pattern. This part right here is explaining what I'm talking about now. If you'll put a stitch marker in on here, as we start increasing, you're going to have this that you can actually move this peg down, okay, and just move it every other peg. So you just skip one, and that way you will retain this same stitch pattern and nothing gets out of line. It will make it much easier for you later. All right, so let's begin. Go ahead and cast on, work your ribbing, pause your video, and I will meet you there right after working the ribbing. See you soon. We've come to the end of our 2 inches of our cuff or ribbed pattern. I've got 8 rows as before, and we're on this side over here. You're ready to begin your textured stitch pattern, but we're going to make an alternate. So let's go over to the pattern here. The alternate textured pattern, it ensures a smoother edge for seaming at the sleeve. This is the only time that I've really changed it from the original pattern. It just makes it smoother on the Loom Knit version. It was just a little jagged doing it with the purl edge. So this purl edge is on row 2. It's the only one that changes. You can see I have a knit 1 at the beginning and then a knit 1 at the end, and really it is the same throughout. So you're just going to do those 4 rows. Row 1 is a setup, then you've got your patterned row with the knit 1 at the beginning and end, and then you have your 2 rows of knitting. So go ahead and do those 4 rows, pause your video, and meet me back at the end of those, and we'll move on to the increases. See you soon. You've got your 4 rows on here, and now we want to go over to the pattern, and we're going to explain for a little bit, and then we're going to come back and I'll show you how to start making the increases on the left and right side of your knitting, whether you're going to be increasing on a 4th row or a 6th row. And yes, we haven't done a 6th row in this pattern, but we're going to be having a special way of counting. So you're going to need some stitch markers. I used about 8 for my size small, but on the upper 2 sizes you need about 12 of them. So 8 to 12 stitch markers that you can open up and close. They're locking stitch markers. Use those. Let's run over to the pattern now. Okay, we're in this section here where it says sleeve increases, just before it says the size medium only. So right here, sleeve increases are worked every 4 or 6 rows at both the beginning and the end of the row. Okay, and then while you're following that alternate texture stitch pattern, the increases are either on a row 2 or they're on a row 4. Now I know it sounds funny, that's not a 6, but a 6th row, because it alternates, you go 1 2 3 4 and then add the next 1 2 for the next row. That row 2 becomes a 6th row. But when I add 6 more to that, we end up flopping over back to a row 4. And so if you have to increase on a 6th row, if you're one of those sizes, then it will switch to either working on a patterned row 2 or a knit row 4. Okay, so we'll show you the increases on both of those rows, so it's a little bit easier to understand, and you can pause and rewind and do that again if you need to. But it can be a little bit confusing, so those extra stitch markers are really great to mark that. And I put that tip on here. After you work an increase row, place a locking stitch marker on the back or the front. I found it was easier on the back of your knitting, and mark the same peg column each time to make counting easier, and use this marker to check if you're on a 4th row or a 6th row by counting between the markers. Okay, so let's go over the sizes that are affected. All of them really are, but the first 3 sizes, the small and medium and large, all are going to rotate every 6th row. Okay, and then the upper 3 sizes are every 4th row. So those 3 sizes, it's easy to remember every time you do one of the last knit rows, the row right before your setup, you're going to be increasing on that row. Now, if you are a medium or a large, you're going to be changing that. And so we will stop our video once you get to this number here. Once you get all your increases to these numbers, then you'll pause and come back to this part. So you're going to be increasing until you have 49 stitches for the small, 45 stitches for the medium and large, 61 for the extra large and the 2X, 3XL, and 63 for the 4 or 5XL. Okay, so let's jump over to our pattern and want to show you what to do. Go ahead and put this aside. So imagine that you're beginning your patterns, because you actually need to start this way. So our row 1 is still the setup row. So go ahead and do one more setup row. We're knitting, we're slipping with the yarn in front of the peg and knitting 1 and repeating. Then come back and do your patterned row, and then you're going to do 1 knit row all the way across, and pause your video and meet me back at the other side to do our first increase row. This will be an increase row for a 4th row. All right, we'll see you soon. Okay, so we're going to do a row 4 increase. It starts off the same for a row 2 increase or a row 4, but I wanted to start on this one because you can see there's all knit stitches, and if we were on a row 2 increase, you would see that extra stitch over here, and I don't want to confuse you. So what's going to happen is to knit in the front, purl in the back. We are going to make that kind of increase with putting our yarn in front of our peg, so wrap it around, and then we're going to pull downward and make a new loop, and then take that loop and move it over to our peg on the outside. So just place it and then take your yarn and tighten it up and pull it. Okay, and so now we have our stitch out here, and then this stitch that we just came from, we're going to put our yarn to the front and down underneath that loop and pull upward and make a loop like we're purling. And then we just take it off and then place. And I go ahead and tighten up the stitches so I have a nice even increase here. Okay. and then you move on with your remaining row. So in this row, we're going to continue knitting all the way until we get to this last stitch over here, and we're going to leave this one alone. So go ahead and work up until there's one stitch remaining. Pause your video and I'll see you at that point. Oh, before you continue on, if you are doing your increases on row 6s only, just take this one out. You don't actually need to increase just yet. You can take out this last stitch and place that on there, and go ahead and knit across, and meet me back at that other end for your instructions. And of course, the people who are repeating on the 4th row, just continue on down. All right, pause your video and I'll see you there. Okay, so for the people who are doing the 4th row increases, we have worked all the way down to we have one stitch left. You're going to take that stitch that you have not worked yet and move it over one peg. So you're moving one to the outside. We're going to do the same increase, but this time we're going to take that stitch that we haven't worked yet and make a knit stitch. So we're pulling downward to make a loop. And that loop is going to go on the empty peg here. So place it on the empty peg. We're not going to the outside, but we were going to this stitch that's in the middle, okay? And now, because our yarn is still moving in this direction, now we can actually do the purl stitch on this last stitch here. So this was knit in the front, purl in the back, and that's what that one stitch does. It just makes an increase, and this purl stitch, even though I said we're not going to be purling on the end stitches, this increase is just fine. It works out really well. It actually works better than doing an E-wrap type, which is in the back loop type of stitch increase. Okay, so once we've done that one, we are ready to move on and continue. And we want to go ahead and mark our increase row. So I've got my stitch marker here, and whether you're increasing on a 6th row or a 4th row, you're going to come all the way down to the opposite side and put it in the back of one of those stitches. Just go to that purl bump and close it up and lock it in, okay? And then every time you do an increase row, you could actually do the first set of increases and go ahead and put in another stitch marker on this side. And then that way, when you've knit several rows down, you can tell how many rows that you've done and if you're ready to make an increase. And the reason why it's on this other side is because we always start our increases on this end of our knitting rather than this end over here, okay? So because I am a 6th row increaser on my small one, I'm actually going to go ahead and take this out, as I don't need to. I don't need to have that one. So I just finished that out by knitting that, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and talk about if you are increasing on that row. So we did this 4th row increase. What I'm going to show you here in a moment is a row 2 increase. All right, so if you are a 4th row increaser where you're having to increase every 4th row, which is the top 3 sizes, you can continue knitting until you have either 61 or 63 stitches depending upon your size. 61 for the extra large and 2X 3XL, and 63 for the 5XL. Okay, so you're going to continue going down, and pause your video and meet back when you only have one stitch left or one peg that's empty on your loom. All right, for the rest of us, the ones who have these lower 3 sizes, of course, if you're working the 6th row, we're going to work back the setup row now, okay? So we're going to slip with the yarn in front of the peg and get all set up, and then we're going to go to our 2nd row and make our increase, okay? All right, go ahead and do that. Pause your video, and I'll meet you on the other side getting ready for row 2. See you soon. Okay, so we're ready to knit in the front and purl in the back increase. We're going to wrap our yarn around our peg, and then we're going to pull a loop down, place that loop on the outside peg, tighten up your yarn, and then we're going to purl that peg that we started with. Okay, so purl, it's actually the 2nd peg now. Lift that old loop off, put the new loop on, and you're ready to begin your row again. So you see that we have slip with the yarn in front of the peg here, and we have 2 stitches on the outside here. So you can still do your purl one below, but as you see, we're going to have a different setup the next row. Okay, so whenever we start doing our setup row in 4 more rows, we're going to need actually, yeah, in 3 more rows, we're going to have a couple of knit stitches on the end before this slip with the yarn in front of the peg, and that's going to be at the other side where that stitch marker is. So go ahead and continue on, pause your video, meet me back when you have 1 stitch left, and we'll do this one together. See you soon. Okay, so I've got 1 stitch left. I had the purl one below here. We're going to pick up the last stitch and place it 1 over to the outside. Go ahead and do that. And then we're going to move our yarn to the back and go to this last stitch, and we're going to do a traditional knit stitch. We're going to wrap the peg. Okay, and then grab that as a loop and pull downward. Okay, and then place it onto the empty peg, tighten it up, and then bring your yarn forward and purl. So it's the same as we did on the other ones, okay? Same increase. All right, tighten that up. Okay, so after a 6th row increase, we want to mark our knitting in the back here. And by the way, I have extra yarn here because, y'all, my yarn broke. It broke on this last stitch. I don't know what I did. But anyway, I pulled it back. No worries. I just frogged back, and then I changed it in the middle of the row instead of here. So I just want to tell you what that is. You're like, what is that? Anyway, let's come over here. We're going to put our stitch marker in this last stitch here so that we've knit over just one of these stitches in the back here, and I suggest using the back of a purl stitch and not the purl one below, so make sure you use a column that has that little purl on it, and go ahead and close that locking marker up. And whenever you have your increase rows, you're going to do it all on this same peg. You'll be able to tell it's just lining up with that column, and you can count how many rows are in between. So you're going to begin again, and of course you're on what would be a row 3, where you knit a row 3 and a row 4 and come back, and then you're going to do 4 more repeats of that 4 row repeat, which would mean that the next time you get to a row 4, okay, so you knit it once here, and then the next time that would be another repeat row. So you're repeating every 6th row, but it could happen on a row 4 increase, or a row 4 to do the increase, or a row 2 to do the increase. So you really have to pay attention to your stitch markers back here, and it'll always happen after you work your way back to the other side. Okay, all right, I hope that helps you. Be sure and keep your stitch marker here handy so that you know which one has the slip with the yarn in front when you begin your pattern row. That way you know you start with a knit 2 and then get that pattern going with the slip with the yarn in front here. As you increase and get all the way down to here, you might want to move this stitch marker over. So this one could be moved over to here, and then here you're skipping every other one so that you know where to begin, and it's closer to where the row actually begins, rather than have to count every time and move it down. All right. Well, go ahead and work on that until you have all of your stitches. Let's go look at the pattern. So I'm looking at this part here where it says continue increasing 1 stitch at the end of the next and following 6th or 4th rows until they are 49 stitches for the small, 45 for the medium, large is also 45, 61 for both the extra large and the 2X, 3XL, and 63 for the 4 or 5XL. Okay, pause your video and meet me back when, if you're a medium, when you have 45, and we'll talk about this next part, and then everybody will follow along for the next part. All right, we'll see you soon. This note is for the medium and large sizes only. You're going to continue that same pattern and increase every 6th row until you reach 45 stitches. Now you notice it's lower than this one here, and that's because down here it wants you to stop increasing on the 6th row and start increasing on every 4th row until you get to 55 stitches or 57 stitches. So I suggest getting a little stitch marker and marking your loom at the 45 1.25 mark, so that once you get there, you'll know to start increasing every 4th row, and you don't necessarily have to keep marking every 6th row unless you just want to mark that you've increased at the right increments. Okay, so continue on, pause your video, and I'll meet you back in a moment. See you soon. All right, so you've done all of your increasing, and now you need to start knitting the right length. So as you can see, I've already started knitting that right length, so I want to go over some numbers with you. Now, just make sure that you've got all of your stitches done except for this last peg. If you set it up the way I did, you should only have one last peg left. Okay, and so let's go over and look at the pattern to see what length you need, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of math to make sure you get the right amount of ridges. Okay, we're going to look at this part. It says all sizes continue even in pattern until sleeve from beginning measures, and then know that beginning is at that cuff area. Measures 16 inches for the small medium, 17 inches for the large extra large, and 18 inches for the 2 3X and the 4 or 5X. And then we're going to place markers on the knitting at each end of the last row, and that's going to be referenced when we're sewing in the sleeves, okay? And then you're going to work 4 more rows until it's finished. So you just have 4 more rows knitting even, and then you bind off. So we don't need to show that part or this part, but what we do need to see is how to get to this number and where we want to put in those stitch markers. So let me show you that right now. So before you start knitting this up, just make sure you have enough ridges. So let's go ahead and look at my calculator to show you that. So I have a sleeve that I need is 16 inches, and so I've got 16 inches minus the 2 for my cuff, and I get 14. Your number may be either 15 or 16 depending upon your size. Now I'm going to measure how many rows I get in 1 inch, and we measured that earlier on with our swatch. Mine is 6, so I'm going to take that and multiply that times 6 stitches per inch, or 6 rows per inch, equals 84. Okay, so 84, I'm going to divide by the row count in the stitch pattern. So divide by 4, and I get 21. So I need 21 of those ridges that I can count. So I know that I'm at the right point right there. And of course, my sleeve is going to be a little bit longer because we're going to add those 4 rows in the end. But know that this is where you're going to mark your knitting for referencing and sewing. So let's go jump over there. So once you've made all your increases, you can go ahead and take off these stitch markers, and then you can use one back here. So before I continue on those last 4 rows, just place one onto the knitting, just like you've been doing, but just do them on the very ends. So there's one, and there's the other. Right along that edge, just go right into that stitch there. Okay. And then go ahead and pause your video, get to that point, make your 4 extra rows and bind off, and I will see you at that point. See you soon. All right, so we've made our sleeve. Go ahead and make the second one, and if you want to block it, you can, but I would suggest you need to go ahead and tighten up your cast on. We'll do that on another video, but you can wait until then and just make your 2 sleeves, and we'll see each other for the next time when we add in our front and backs together and sew up the shoulders and put on the collar along the top. We'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today, where we help you stitch your love and love your stitches. See you again soon.